Good afternoon, folks. And those of you who have logged in from the different time zones, wherever it is morning, good morning, or good evening. But for most from India, well, good afternoon. So the latest regulatory updates in financial reporting. We'll talk of some of the amendments, but at the very outset, let me welcome you to this webinar. Before I get down to the brass tacks, permit me to explain the rationale for the chamber in holding this webinar. We are here giving a forum for the experts, industry representatives, and other stakeholders for analyzing the recent amendments that have happened to the Schedule 3 of the Companies Act 2013. Without getting into the nitty-gritty of the elements of the amended provisions of the schedule, I'm sure the galaxy of experts who are present here will elucidate in an incisive and simpler way. So let me state that accounting standard has created, among other things, to add value to prescribed disclosure requirements and enables financial statements to be more transparent. When I talk of transparency, let me first transparently tell you that once I was educated to be a chartered accountant. Well, technically, I'm still a chartered accountant, but some of these amendments and the changes that have happened, which the eminent panel will talk about, will bring about the progress and take into account where we are today for what it takes to do financial reporting in the new world. The accounting standards lay down the manner and format in which the economic and business information should be presented to various readers and the users of financial statement in what I guess is a structured manner to ensure the communication between the board of the reporting entity and its stakeholders, whether they are shareholders, whether they are lenders, whether they are customers, or whatever shape and form is healthy, constructive, and based on mutual trust and respect. I don't think I need to mention to this august audience that the purpose behind the amendment of the Schedule 111 of the Companies Act, the transparent financial reporting system with checks and balances, is critical to empower and nurture the healthy growth of the corporate sector. It is now a recognition that how important well-performing corporate entities are to our national economy. And particularly in these pandemic times, we are seeing how hugely important this has become. The reverse is also true. A corporate entity working under opaque and non-transparent manner puts severe strains on the economy. I need not elaborate how insidious cases of corporate entities going bust in recent times had cast a shadow on the economic structure and shaken the trust reposed on the companies by the investor and general public. Some companies going bust brought down the index of the world. Some companies within India going bust brought down the stock market. And that is how the interdependence is clearly visible for all of us to see. Let me flag some of the amendments that have been brought about in the schedule. They include rounding off of financial values, presentation of shareholding of the promoters, and having been a promoter of multiple what were at that time startups and today are perhaps some of the largest companies in that area, I can tell you how important it is to bring out the ownership. The reclassification of the present maturities of long-term borrowing, the trade payables due for payment by the company, the reclassification of security deposits, reporting on property, plant, equipment, intangible assets, additional disclosure of borrowers, the CSR activity on which a lot of the future of where we are taking this country and how the corporate sector is contributing to that. We made CSR activities a requirement for profitable companies, at least to report on, if not do. And therefore, the CSR activities being brought out becomes very critical for us to understand how that corporate is contributing. We have a panel of experts to speak on the importance and impact and what each additional steps that the corporations have to take in these additional areas. I will not dwell upon introducing the esteemed panel members who are there. My good friend, coach and guide, if I may add that to Asim, who is the chairman of the Financial Services and the Taxation Committee of the ISEC, NIC, and the managing partner of ASC Legal Solicitors and Advocates, along with the co-chair, Sachin Vasudeva, of this committee. They are both here. I'll hand over the mic to Asim, who will introduce the panel and conduct the proceedings. Again, folks, I welcome you all to this. And last but not the least, I would like to thank NextDM, the SKP Group to be a co-organizer, and the Services Export Promotion Council and the Gurgaon Chamber of Commerce and Industry to be the supporter chamber to organize these events. Welcome again, and over to you, Asim.
Thank you, Ramanji. As affectionately I call you my chair, once a chartered accountant, always a chartered accountant. It's like learning how to ride a bicycle. Perhaps one would never forget. So we try and bring the nostalgia back as in when we do all this. And this is hopefully part of an ongoing series. And I remember discussing the whole aspect of corporate governance and how Schedule 3 of Companies Act equally is an important ingredient in achieving that larger objective, considering that you yourselves are a pioneer and a mentor, guide, and an angel investor to many startups, and therefore how much governance is of importance to you. I don't think very many of us could relate as best as probably you would relate on the feet, and how much value or efficacy it brings to the whole thing. I've had a few rounds of discussion, and thank you, Team SKP, and we value your participation with the chamber for long, and glad to have you back. And I hope this is just the end of this awkward phase, where all of us have been tested, and we would have loved to have you more on, especially on aspects of governance and all the things which are happening, especially the consultation paper of SEBI and the ICDR requirements, so on and so forth. Coming back to Schedule 3 and the amendments which we all understand came about sometimes in the month of March 24, 2021. And the idea was to align the disclosures, more particularly taking into consideration the CARO 2020 and the Indian and the company's version of the accounting standards, so to speak. But all this, and before I ask Sachin to do the formal introduction of the experts, if I, having looked at it from the lens of either as chair of an audit committee, and all these hats, various hats we all don, either we pretty much chair the audit committees, we participate in the deliberations, or we facilitate the deliberations as business or corporate attorneys. So sometimes you sit in, and dare I say, in judgment over what has been reported. The primary consideration from the user, who is the investor, is that how much user friendly is the disclosures or the reporting done by the auditor. Is it dumping of information to de-risk the allegation of inadequate disclosure. That's point number one. And therefore, the copious copious annual reports now end up looking like a shop floor manual rather than a product of intellect. Is this a situation where we could probably stare into the eyes of the directors and ask them, and more particularly independent directors, and we are equally part of that great brigade, so to speak, how many of us would have read the MDA and the board sustainability and internal integrated reports of companies where we end up serving as directors, I mean, it reminds me of a metaphor where a doctor wants to examine a patient and the patient is so well clothed that it's impossible for doctor to do a quick examination with so much of dressing unless you completely undress the patient. Uh, so so where are we? Ideally, are we looking at situations where we end up taking shelters against under the very fanciful expressions of true and fair? And it's only when, as Ramanji rightly pointed out, that only when the alarm bells do end up ringing and suddenly the auditor's report changes its tone totally, and anything and everything is doubted. I mean, as a lawyer who's a guardian to many boards, all that I can say is that when I deal with the relationship between the auditors and the auditee and the recent overdrive, the regulatory overdrive, so much so in the reported decision of one of those big audit firms, the NCLAT, which is the National Company Law Appellate Tribunal, said in that beleaguered ILFS matter that why should auditors not be made party to the proceedings when they themselves have so much of questions to answer. So I think there is a need to peel off many layers of this overdressed patients and the annual reports and disclosures. To my mind, there should not be. I mean, do we still need some very strong templates, or should we leave it to the discretion of the auditors, where auditors should not only report on things which need attention or improvements or opine the way, or rather should opine the way where how the audit committees function in their role of oversight of accounting and financial controls, or should there be very strong templates to work around, and therefore at the end of the day these are more legalese rather than user friendly reports. I mean, all that I can say is that in the recent past the tendency has been to write so much, as I said, that it just ends up losing the purpose. So to demystify all this, I think we have a great set of experts amongst us, and I'll ask Sachin to introduce Nimesh and Monish, and then we take it from there in the interest of time.
Thank you, Asim.
Yeah.
Good afternoon, everybody. As Mr. Chavla mentioned, we have two highly qualified speakers for today, and it's my privilege to introduce both of them to you. Nimesh Kapadia qualified as a chartered accountant in 2002. He has a 20-year plus experience in which for 12 years he served with the Big Four. Nimesh has managed and led teams for various assurance engagements, including reporting under various international gaps. With an acute understanding of finance and accounting, Nimesh has worked with Indian businesses and multinationals on assessments across sectors in areas such as governance, compliance, and internal control reviews. Welcome, Nimesh. Nimesh is joined by his colleague Monish Sharma, who is also a chartered accountant with a 15+ years post-qualification experience. He also holds a diploma in international financial reporting by ACCA of UK. As a director in SJP, he is responsible for managing the attest function of the firm. Monish has undertaken engagements in international GAAP, Ind AS, Indian GAAP, and has been involved in various audits, both at the company level and at the group level. He has a strong understanding of accounting requirements and complexity involved in audit and other engagements across various industries. With this brief introduction, I hand it over to Nimish.
Thanks so much, Sachin, for the introduction, and thanks, Mr. Roy and Asim, for setting the tone right. You made my job easy in terms of giving an overview. Very insightful sort of introduction you guys have given. So to start with, firstly, I would want to thank ISEC for inviting us for this session, and it's a pleasure to have this a round of exchange of thoughts on this critical subject, which we are all required to deal with from a reporting perspective. So Schedule 3, as we say, and as we've been speaking since the last some say 15 odd minutes, it deals with the financial reporting which corporates have to do. It's actually the summation of all that they have done through the year to present it in a templatized format of putting it in the financial statements as such. This started off in say the erstwhile act, which is 1956, when it was known as say Schedule 6 as such. And Schedule 6 has, over the years, when it comes to the Companies Act 2013, changed from Schedule 610 to Schedule 3 now. The base remains the same, which is financial reporting. But I must say, over the years, with so much changing in the environment around, there is a lot which has got improvised in what is expected from a financial reporting. So it is not merely the numbers and the figurative aspect of what gets concluded in the form of a balance sheet, profit and loss account, cash flow, and the likes of those. This, over the period, has a host of disclosures and notes which are expected to be provided in the templatized version to help explain the readers of the financials and the stakeholders and gain a better understanding of what has gone through with the corporates that they are dealing with, and understand the organization way better for them to take the rightful calls in their assessment of what the organization is all about. Yeah, can we change the slide, please? Yeah. So here, what we are trying to bring across is, what is it that has changed over the years? What is the theme on which the reporting requirements have been changing? And Mr. Roy has rightly put across that the ask from the stakeholders' perspective, the corporate environment in terms of the frauds, the various mishappenings which have happened in the past, have led to the regulators starting to feel that more and more is required in a structured manner to be put across in the financial reporting for the stakeholders to understand the status, the functioning, and the organization that they are dealing with way better. So transparency definitely plays a role. The second aspect is getting more aligned to the global reporting requirements. So that's another very critical aspect where you see certain terms changing, certain manner in which the reportings are really changing across. Some aspects which raised questions in the earlier version of Schedule 3, and where people felt that this probably needs a different place where a particular item needs to be reported, has also been considered by the regulators in getting it right in this revised version of Schedule 3. One very important aspect, if I may put across, has changed is the regulators felt it really important that they have something like a maker and a checker, if I may use these terms. So a lot of responsibility has been cast on the management to report the things right in the financial statement. So what is got included in the financial statements is looked at as an ownership of the management of the company, to report these facts across. And a mirror image, as in the form of a checker, the auditor is required to validate these reportings as part of their reporting in CARO, which is the auditor's report annexure as such. So it is more so like a mirroring, where the responsibilities which were smudged earlier have been cast very objectively across in these versions. So if you really see Schedule 3 and the audit report, the CARO together, you will realize that various aspects are required to be reported by management in the financial reporting or the financial statements, and the auditors requiring their validation in the audit report in the form of reportings in CARO. So that's a big difference that we need to be mindful of. You can be on the earlier slide. Yeah. So what has got enhanced, what has changed? Mr. Roy probably briefed it across. I'm just going to reiterate these points. There have been changes, as I mentioned, in terms of what was required to be tweaked, what was not presented well to be brought across as changes in the revised sort of Schedule 3. But very critically, there are disclosures now required in terms of ownership, who owns the enterprise and what the enterprise actually owns further across in terms of subsidiaries, holdings, and the likes of those. The shareholders and the promoters have more disclosures to be given in terms of the transactions with the group, the KMPs, the related parties, and the likes of those. Certain nuances like Benami properties held by the organization, immovable properties not held in the name of the company. So these are aspects which the regulators felt that it's best known to the stakeholders well, transparently across in the financials. On the trade receivables, trade payables, and certain, say, immovable properties, there is enhanced reporting in terms of better aging analysis provided as well. And further across, there has been introduction of financial ratios forming part of, the financial reporting as such. So these are few of the changes which, I've spelled out. I'm sure when Monish picks it up in the detailed presentation, we'll talk more about it at that juncture. Yeah, Gandhar, you will change this. So maybe now getting more into the thick of, what is Schedule 3 and how it is structured. So, Schedule 3 has 3 divisions in it. Division 1 talks about, companies and corporates to whom, say, the erstwhile Indian GAAP is required to be complied with or adhered with. Division 2 comprises of entities to whom the Ind AS, which is the more matured and revised IFRS equivalent sort of accounting standards applicable. And Division 3 are entities where NBFCs are sort of clustered there, to whom the Ind AS sort of standards really apply. Yeah. What has happened is, changes have been done by the regulators where most of them apply to all the 3 divisions or all the 3 classified companies, and a host of it is presented on the right side of the slide. But there are certain specific ones which have been looked at for each division as such. So there are certain reporting requirements which have changed for Division 1, some for Division 2, and some specifically for Division 3 as such. So that's how things have really been put across in the revised sort of Schedule 3. So while I give you this overview, I also want to tell you that the applicability of whom this the revised Schedule 3 applies remains the same. There is no change that has been brought across to whom these the Schedule 3 now will apply. So it pretty much applies to all corporates except for banking companies, insurance companies, and companies which are involved in generation of power. So it pretty much applies to all corporates, if I may say so. So with this, I have sort of tried to give you guys a structure and an overview in terms of what to expect, raising the curtain a little from where Monish will pick up. So I think now, Monish, over to you in terms of taking it in a detailed manner. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nimish, for the insightful introduction to Schedule 3 amendments. And good evening, everyone. For today's discussion, what we have done is we have categorized the Schedule 3 amendments into 4 segments. Segment 1 talks about the new disclosure requirements for Division 1 entities which are typically IGAAP entities. Segment 2 is for Division 2 entities, which are Ind AS compliant entities. Segment 3 is for NBFC companies, the Division 3 entities. And segment 4, we will be discussing about the common changes which are applicable to all the 3 entities. And move to the next slide. And these are some of the symbols that we have used in the subsequent slides. Two notepad will signify similar reporting requirements under CARO. So we have done a matching for you in terms of what is there in CARO vis-a-vis what's there in Schedule 3 to give you a flavor of both the aspects. The bell icon is the special takeaways on each slide. So some key points which we want you to focus on or key takeaways on respective slides. Let's move to our segment 1, which is applicable to Division 1 entities. We can move to the next slide. The first amendment is related to the rounding off. We all know that prior to amendment, the rounding off of numbers was voluntary. And we have seen various diverse practices were being followed by corporates. We have also seen that the extent of balance sheets were presented in 2 decimals. Now, the regulator has plugged all these nuances which were there. Now there are 2 amendments under this clause. The word maybe has been replaced by shall be, which means that now the rounding off is mandatory for all the companies. And the word total turnover has been replaced with total income. So this means that, while checking the threshold for the first part of rounding off, one has to consider both revenue from operations and other income. Overall rounding off has been, categorized into 2 buckets. Companies who have total income less than 100 crores, they have to do the rounding in 100, 1000, millions or decimals. And companies who have total income more than 100 crores, these companies have to do the rounding off in lakhs, millions and crores. Pretty straightforward, change, I would say. But again, this will ensure that there's a consistency in what is being reported in the corporate domain. With this, we can move to our next slide. These are some of the changes on the face of the balance sheet. In Schedule 3, these changes are just a catch-up requirement to the accounting standard. So what you can see, instead of property, plant and equipment, a word and intangibles has been added. And instead of tangible assets, now we have to use property, plant and equipment. You all know that similar changes were done in Ind AS 16 and AS 10. Here, fixed assets are now termed as property, plant and equipment. So again, I would say catch-up adjustment by the Schedule 3 by the regulators. Move to the next slide. Next change is the classification. The first change relates to with respect to the borrowings. So earlier, the current maturities of long-term borrowings were classified under other current liabilities and not under short-term borrowings. So it was a kind of an anomaly that, if I am holding a loan, so the long-term portion is categorized as long-term debt, while the current maturity were classified as other current liabilities. So this anomaly has been plugged by the regulators in this amendment. Now one has to show the short-term borrowings, current maturities of debts under short-term borrowing rule. The second change with respect is towards security deposits. Earlier, security deposits given were classified as long-term loans and advances. The inherent nature of security deposits is neither a loan or an advance. This anomaly has also been rectified by the amendment. Now the security deposits will be classified under other non-current assets. Again, a pretty, I would say a straightforward change in terms of classification on the financial statements. Move to the next slide.
Just a sec, there is a question which has come in terms of which are the Division 1 companies. I'll just like to reiterate that Division 1 is companies to whom the erstwhile GAAP reporting, which is the Indian GAAP, applies. So all the entities to whom the IGAAP applies are Division 1 companies. So put it differently, all the companies which are having Ind AS reporting are covered in 2 and 3. So these are all the other companies. Yeah, Monish, you can continue.
Next change is a very important change. And this amendment whereby companies are now required to produce aging schedule in their financial statements for trade receivables. Earlier, the disclosure was restricted to trade receivable outstanding for less than 6 months and more than 6 months. Practically, if you see, this information was very little for the readers of the financial statements. Now, Schedule 3 has prescribed this format, which requires classification of non-current and current, disputed and disputed balances, and one has to give an aging for the same. So the aging is less than 6 months, 6 months to 1 year, 1 year to 2 years, 2 years to 3 years, and more than 3 years. Earlier, access to this information was restricted to management and the auditors. But now this information will be available to the readers of the financial statements, just like bankers, your competitors, creditors, regulatory agencies, and investors. Giving more information in the financial means more questions and inquiries by the stakeholders. Bankers could also raise more questions on what is the provisioning policies of the company, why these balances are outstanding for quite some time. Companies should be cautious and you should pay attention while they'll be reporting first time in financial year 22. And they also will be required to give a comparative for the previous year. This amendment also requires similar details to be given for unbilled receivables separately. Now, you recall earlier unbilled were just shown as one line item in the financial statements. This disclosure will pick up cases where old unbilled balances are outstanding, but these are not billed to the customers. It will also raise questions on the management revenue recognition process, that whether the revenue recognized in past, which is yet to be billed, was it right or is it just a book entry? Why customers are not accepting your invoices? Why these are outstanding? Why there's a delay in billing? So companies, while they'll be presenting this information, they should be ready for these kind of questions. Management will also be required to justify their provisioning policy. And now the bankers will keep a close eye on the old unprovided balances. And when your limits are being finalized for the year end, they'll be mindful of the information which is given in the financial statements. We'll move to the next slide. With this, we have completed our first segment. And now we move to a segment 2, which deals with Schedule 3 amendments which are applicable to Ind AS companies. We can move to the next slide. Okay. The first change which is applicable to Ind AS compliant companies is introduction of lease liabilities, both current and non-current. Now this is just a catch-up adjustment by Schedule 3 to include the requirements of Ind AS 16 leases. We have all seen that in financial year 20, when lease standard was introduced, similar disclosure requirements was given by majority of the companies. At that time, there was no guidance under Schedule 3 to where to classify these lease balances. Now, companies have drawn analogy from IFRS 16 and other international gaps. Now, this specific disclosure requirement has been plugged by Schedule 3. Second change which has undergone is other financial assets. Now, companies will be required to show their security deposits and bank deposit with maturity more than 12 months under other current assets. Again, I would say this is just a catch-up adjustment by Schedule 3 in terms of the disclosure requirements. This, we move to our next slide. Okay. In statement of change in equity, we know that prior to amendment, a movement was required for the equity share capital, whereby the opening balances plus changes were given for the equity share capital. Schedule 3 is now requiring to disclose any changes in equity share capital due to prior period errors and any restated balances in the beginning of the year. Amendment will facilitate accounting and disclosure requirements for errors or prior period items in the equity share schedule. The regulators are also expecting there could be some errors in equity share capital schedule, which can be rectified and adequate disclosure has been facilitated. Now, the amendment will also highlight certain disclosure requirements like remeasurement of defined benefit plans or fair value changes related to credit risk of financial liabilities. These all will also be classified under the retained earnings. Next important change is the other equity schedule. You all know that, share application money pending allotment. Earlier, companies were disclosing this particular caption as per, the references to various financial statements or past precedents. There was no designated place in the financial statements where share application money could be presented. This anomaly has also been picked up by amendment. Now, under the other equity schedule, share application money pending allotment needs to be shown. Second change is equity component of compound financial instruments. In case of compound financial instruments, if there's any equity component, though companies were showing under other equity component only, but again, there was no specific requirement under Schedule 3. So Schedule 3 has again, picked up this from the practice or the international practice and requirements of the accounting standard to include this requirement. Money received against the share warrants. This will also be shown under the other equity schedule. We can move to our next slide. Trade receivable aging schedule for Division 2 and Division 3 entities. Now, the disclosure requirements are similar to what we have discussed for Division 1 entities. The changes here are aligned to the disclosure requirements of Ind AS 107, which is financial instruments, and Ind AS 109. Terminology used here, if you can see on the screen, are like credit impaired, significant increase in credit risk, are based on the requirements of the accounting standard Ind AS. Information collected in audit evidence prior to this amendment is now available with the public domain, and all the management decisions can be challenged once this information goes into the public domain. So I would say this is a pretty critical aspect of the amendment, and management should pay special attention on what is being presented in the forthcoming financials of the company. We can move to the next slide. Fair valuation of investment property and intangibles. The company shall disclose as to whether the fair value of investment property and intangibles as measured for disclosure purpose in the financial statement based on the valuation by a registered valuer or not. We all know that Ind AS 40 required investment properties to be subsequently measured using cost model, and companies has to show the fair value in the form of notes to accounts. Likewise, Ind AS 38 also requires, it permits the subsequent measurement of intangibles using a revaluation model. Any change in the fair value of the property, investment property and intangible needs to be disclosed in the financial statement. Move to the next slide. Now with this, we have completed our segment 2, and now we can move to a segment 3, where we will discuss changes which are applicable to Division 3 entities. A very small change which has come up, which is Schedule 3 now requires ratios to be disclosed in the financial statements. So all the NBFC companies are now required to give capital to risk weighted average ratios, Tier 1 CRR ratios, Tier 2 CRR ratios, liquidity coverage ratios. The Reserve Bank of India also requires NBFCs to disclose these ratios in their annual reports. But now Schedule 3 has picked up these requirements specifically for the financial statements. And move to the next slide. Now we will be discussing the new disclosure requirements which were introduced and which are common for all level of companies, level 1, Division 1, Division 2, and Division 3. The shareholding pattern of promoters. The new amendment required disclosure of shareholding pattern of promoters. The required disclosures are name of the promoter, their shareholding details, percentage of total shares, change in shareholding of the promoters during the year. Earlier, the promoter shareholding was part of the corporate governance report, and disclosure of shareholding was given only for shareholders who are holding more than 5% of the share capital. The basic intent behind the disclosure is to specify and mention who are the promoters behind the company, and if there's a change in the shareholding pattern of these promoters. Any significant decline in shareholding of the promoters can be a red flag for the bankers and the investors. Now, the specific information will be included in the financial statements of the company. And move to the next slide. Evaluation of property, plant and equipment and intangibles. So the new amendment introduced by Schedule 3, whereby in addition to the normal reconciliation of property, plant and equipment and intangibles, which was like opening balances plus addition minus disposal minus depreciation, now companies are required to disclose any addition on acquisition of a business combination. So if you acquire any assets in a business combination in the form of a merger or amalgamation, that needs to be shown separately in the financial statements. Any amount of change due to revaluation during the year, that also needs to be disclosed. And if the change is more than 10%, this particular disclosure requirement will be triggered for the companies. Any reversal of impairment loss needs to be shown separately in the financial statement. Companies need to specifically disclose that whether the revaluation is based on the valuation by a registered valuer as per the requirements of the Companies Act, Section 247. Key takeaways or the key focus points which I would like everyone to focus: the 10% movement, either it's an upward movement or a downward movement in the net carrying value of PP or intangible, is a material reporting required item. One doesn't have to see the individual materiality of a company. If any class of PPE, there's a revaluation more than 10%, that needs to be disclosed. There's a specific clause in CARO 2020 where auditor will be reporting that if a change of more than 10% is based on the registered valuation report or not. So pretty straightforward, I would say, but far-fetching implications of this disclosure. The next reporting requirement is to give the aging schedule of trade payables. So like debtors aging schedule, now companies are required to give aging of trade payables also, along with comparatives in the aging buckets of less than 1 year, 1 year to 2 years, 2 to 3 years, and more than 3 years. Aging is to be given from the due date when the payments of creditors fall due. And where no due date is there, the aging is to be prepared from the transaction date. Companies can also require to publish the unbilled balances in a similar pattern. So we have seen in trade receivables, there was a requirement to disclose the unbilled balances. Here, the requirement is also to give details of unbilled payables in case a company has. The focus point here is that what information was privy to the management in the form of MIS and auditors in the form of audit schedules will now be available to all the stakeholders of the company. This will enable the stakeholders to assess the payment patterns and the financial hygiene of the company. Amounts which are unpaid for more than 3 years will also be questioned in the income tax assessment as to why these amounts are not paid for more than 3 years, where these amounts are not disputed. Bankers and lenders and creditors will also be better informed about the payable history and payment trends of the company. And they can also raise questions on the company on the payment patterns. Suppose a company says that we don't have funds to pay, or we are very prompt in making payments for all our creditors, but this aging schedule will disclose everything to the readers of the financials, that what is the payment pattern of the company. And move to the next slide. Application of borrowed funds. The companies have not, a company has used the borrowed funds from financial institutions or banks for a specific purpose. The companies have to disclose whether they have utilized these funds for the specific purpose or not. If they have not utilized these funds for the specific purpose, a disclosure is required as to where these funds have been used. Borrowings are generally deposited in the common account. We all know that whenever money comes to a company, that is deposited to a common account and which is utilized subsequently by the company. Now, with this specific reporting requirement and considering the fungibility of money, management will be required to keep a trail of showing the specific trail where this money has been used and whether the funds have been used for the specific purpose for which the borrowings were taken. Now, if you see, we can on the same slide, we can stay on the same slide. You'll see that, there's a far-fetching implication of this particular amendment where the companies will first be disclosing in their notes to accounts that they have not utilized their funds for the purpose of what they have taken. The auditors will also comment in their CARO. And the directors in their directors report will give reasons for the deviation. So the regulator has, comprehensively covered this particular aspect. And, that's the requirement of the time where banks are crying that their monies are not being used for the purpose of which loans were taken. So pretty welcome move by the regulator to plug these nuances in the public domain. Yeah, we can move to our next slide. We'll move to the additional regulatory information, which is common to all the three entities. Title deed of immovable properties not held in the name of the company. The company shall provide details of all immovable properties other than leases whose title deeds are not held in the name of the company. The format which is given on your screens. And where such immovable properties are jointly held with someone, details are to be required to what extent the company holds the share. Is company share 20%, 30%? What is the extent of share company has? Disclosure requirements are the description of property, what is the gross carrying value of the property, whether this is held in the name of the promoter, a director, a relative, or who's actually controlling this property, that needs to be disclosed. And company has also need to give what are the reasons that such properties cannot be transferred in the name of the company. What will happen with this is that this will create a pressure on the companies and to transfer the properties in the name of the company from its promoters or directors. This reporting will also have impact on the borrowings and credit limits of the companies. Codification will enable the users of the financials to understand the quantum of control that the promoters and directors are exercising on the properties which are either funded by company's own money or company has taken borrowings. And similar reporting requirement is there in CARO 2020, where auditors will be commenting on this particular item. If we move to our next slide, loans and advances in the nature of loans. In case a company has given loans or advances to its promoters, directors, KMPs, and other related parties, either severally or jointly, and these loans are repayable on demand or without specifying any particular terms, then company needs to disclose that what is the amount outstanding at the year end and what is the percentage of this total loan outstanding. Now, again, if you see this amendment holistically, this disclosure will be made by the company, the auditors will be reporting on this particular clause, and management will be giving justifications in their director's report as to why such loans are given for which terms are not specified. Move to the next slide. Again, an important amendment which has very far-reaching implication is to give the aging schedule of capital work in progress and intangibles under development. all the projects which are in progress or projects which are temporarily suspended, a company needs to disclose the aging as less than 1 year to 2 years, 2 years to 3 years, and more than 3 years. Now, this is very common that companies have taken loans from banks and financial institutions, and these projects, these capital projects, are kept on hold, or funds are actually diverted. With this specific aging requirements, these nuances will always be highlighted in the schedule, and bankers and stakeholders can always question that why a particular project is getting delayed, or why there's no progress in these. The next reporting requirement is to give details of CWIP and intangible under development whose completion is overdue, or it has exceeded the cost compared to the original plan. Suppose the cost of a project was 100 crores and company has already reached 150 crores. So then they need to give a justification in the form of aging schedule that why the cost has overshoot. This will also trigger the impairment angle if my cost has increased and against the expected cost. The question, Nemish, can we take up the question now, or we can take the question at the last?
I think there are a lot of questions which have come, so maybe we take up the questions right in the end as such. If there is something which you feel is important to be told so that people are in the flow, you may pick up a question. Otherwise, we can take it up all together in the end.
We can move to the next slide. We have covered this. Next slide. In recent times, the government of India has imposed a severe crackdown on unaccounted income, black money, Benami transactions, and Benami properties. This crackdown has extended to the corporate financial reporting as well. Under the new reporting clause, the company is required to report in case there are any proceedings that have been initiated or are pending against the company for holding Benami properties. Now, what a Benami property has been defined under the Prohibition of Benami Properties Transaction Act 1988. In case such proceedings have been initiated or are pending against the company, the management shall be required to report details of such property, including the year of acquisition, amount involved, who is the beneficiary. If property is in the books, they need to give a reference in the balance sheet. If property is not in the books, this fact needs to be given along with the reasons. And where these proceedings are against the company, they need to disclose whether a provision has been created in the books or a contingent liability has been given in the notes to accounts. Again, I would say this is a pretty stringent reporting requirement, and Prohibition of Benami Property Transaction Act prescribes strict punishment in the form of imprisonment and fines in case of non-compliances, and these are listed on the screen. There's a similar reporting requirement in Caro, where auditors will also be checking this thing and reporting on the Benami properties proceedings against the company. We can move to the next slide. This is a new disclosure requirement for companies which have borrowing from banks and financial institutions based on security of a current assets. The requirement is to disclose whether the quarterly returns or statements of current assets filed by the company with banks or financial institutions are in agreement with the books of accounts. If the quarterly returns or statements filed by the company are not in agreement with the books of accounts, then a reconciliation is required along with the reasons for material discrepancies. Such returns or statements would include stock statements, book debt statements, credit monitoring reports, statements of aging analysis, and likes of those. While Schedule 3 caters all the borrowings from banks and financial institutions, Caro has taken a slight deviation from Schedule 3. Caro requires reporting if the borrowings are in excess of 5 crore rupees. So suppose a company has taken borrowings for 4 crore rupees, then there will be a disclosure requirement in Schedule 3. But auditors will not do any reporting because the amount of borrowing is less than the prescribed threshold of 5 crore rupees. Key takeaway points or the bell points, which are the first Q1 reporting, which is due for June 2021. Management need to take extra precaution while reporting these numbers to banks and financial institutions. Because the auditors will be at the year end will be coming up and asking questions that why these are not matching with your books of accounts. And you also have to provide a reconciliation in your books as to why there were deviations. Management also need to ensure that you initiate discussions with your auditors and devise a testing strategy for testing these balances. Either it could be a quarterly testing by the auditors or a half yearly or a year end. That depends on company to company as to what could be the testing strategy by the auditors. But a discussion is required where companies have huge borrowings from the banks and they submit these information to the banks on a quarterly basis. Move to the next slide. Okay, the next one is on a willful defaulter. When a company is declared a willful defaulter by any bank or a financial institution or other lender, following disclosures needs to be given. What is the date of declaration as a willful defaulter? What are the details of the default, amount and nature of defaults? So all this information will form part of the financial statements. The RBI circular has defined what is a willful defaulter. A person who has the capacity to honor an obligation, but he is not doing it. And a person who has not used the funds and has actually diverted the funds. So we have, many names in public domain which have been categorized as willful defaulters. And in case a company has been declared as a willful defaulter, a disclosure would be required. Now the question is, in case a company has not been declared willful defaulter, the balance sheet date, but has been declared a defaulter before the approval of the financial statements by the board of directors. Now the management shall be required to disclose the date of declaration and details of default mentioned in their financial statements. Not to forget that there's a similar reporting requirement in CARO 2020, where auditors will also check and comment whether a company has been declared a willful defaulter or not. Next slide. Section 248 of the Companies Act requires name of the companies to be removed from ROC register if the company has failed to commence its business within 1 year of incorporation, or a company has not applied for the status of a dormant company and is not carrying out any business or operations within 2 immediate preceding financial years, or a company which has extinguished all its liabilities by a special resolution or by the consent of 75% of the shareholders of the company. Now, Schedule 3 requires a company to give what is the relationship with these stuck-off companies. Whether we have invested in the securities of these companies, do we have receivables or payables from these companies? Do we have shares of these companies, or do we have any outstanding balances? Again, this will highlight any potential impairment matter if company has exposure in these companies. One thing which regulator has not done, I think it could have been an intentionally, if companies under IBC, liquidation and NCLT would have been added here, then this would have been a very comprehensive disclosure for the readers of the financial statements. But as of now, the regulator just want a disclosure for stuck-off companies to be disclosed in the financial statements. Move to the next slide. We have seen recently that there are a lot of public domain, there were a lot of schemes whereby these schemes were approved by NCLT or by the regulators. Now, the disclosure requirement is within a scheme that has been approved by the authorities in terms of Section 230 and 237 of the Companies Act. The company shall disclose the effect of such amalgamation or arrangement, whether that has been accounted in the books of accounts in accordance with the scheme, in accordance with the accounting standards. And if there's any deviation between what has been accounted and what has been prescribed, that deviation needs to be disclosed. Now, to take a classic example, we all know that Ind AS 103 requires accounting to be done from the date when a company acquires a control. Normally, the date of control is constituted as the date when NCLT or the court approves a particular scheme. Many companies, what they do is just for the administrative convenience, they do the accounting from the date when they file this copy of the scheme with the ROC. So companies are required to file the scheme with ROCs within 30 days. So just to match the month-end disclosure, month-end report or the cutoff period, so they do the filing on the particular day and they do the accounting on the date of filing of ROC, which is actually not the intent of the standard, and it actually is the contrary to the requirements of Ind AS 103. So if there are any deviation like this, that deviation needs to be disclosed separately in the financial statements. Second important change is where a company has any charge which is not yet registered, the ROC, beyond the statutory period, details and reasons thereof shall be disclosed by the management in their financial statements. Now, management are required to adhere to the reporting requirements which are there in Section 77 of the Companies Act. Move to the next slide. Compliance with number of layers of the companies. If the company has not complied with the number of layers as prescribed under clause 87 of Section 2 of the Companies Act, it might disclose the name of the companies beyond the specific layers. What are the CIN number of these companies? What is the relationship to the extent of holding? Important point to see here is with reference to Section 287, the term layer means the holding company, subsidiaries, and Act has prescribed that one cannot have more than 2 layers of subsidiaries. So in case a company who has more than 2 layers, that will be a non-compliance with the requirement of the Companies Act and needs to be disclosed in the financial statements. And move to the next slide. Disclosure of key financial ratios. This is only applicable to Division 1 and Division 2 entities. We have seen that under US GAAP, it's very common where many companies give a common size statement, whereby disclosures of key ratios is given along with the explanations. We've also seen that the investor presentation, analyst presentations, and some external websites like ET Money, moneycontrol.com show these key ratios. Now, MCA has mandated for both Division 1 and Division 2 companies to give ratios and provide reasons for deviation more than 25% as compared to previous year. Now, the stakeholders will get, a first-hand analysis of these ratios along with a justification from management, and they don't have to now rely on external sources for getting this information. For your understanding, I have bifurcated these ratios into 4 buckets. First one is the liquidity short-term solvency ratio, long-term solvency ratios, profitability ratios, turnover ratios, and efficiency ratios. Amendment notification is silent whether such ratios have to be disclosed for comparative periods or not. But basis the broad understanding, it should be applicable for comparative periods. We are expecting a clarification from MCA on this particular aspect. The reporting entity is tasked to explain the items including the numerator and denominator which they have used in the ratio calculation. So far, neither the MCA nor ICAI has issued any guidance as to what will be the formulas for these ratios and what will be the numerator or denominator. We expect a guidance either from MC or ICAI so that companies can ensure a uniform base for comparison and disclosures. Now, these ratios, the key part is that any deviation which is more than 25% needs to be disclosed. Now, what needs to be disclosed, what is the nature and what explanations are required has not been clarified by NCA as of now. So again, we can expect some clarifications from NCA as to what needs to be disclosed. I'll move to the next slide.
So, Monish, I'd just like to add a couple of things here. One is that, see, all these are applicable to all companies, whether it is public or private. The only differentiator is if it is specific to Division 2, then to companies which have Ind AS application. Is specific to Division 1, it is only to the IGAP related companies. So that is one. And specifically talking on the ratios point, look at it that way, is that once you have these ratios really spelled out so clearly in the financials, one can compare, in a particular sector or a particular industry, how the company is performing vis-a-vis the whole industry as such. So a lot of information which has come across, a lot of things which have been spoken across will have a lot which can be used as comparatives in terms of performance of the company that we are talking vis-a-vis the industry sector and the likes of those as well. So very far-reaching implications are there for each of these items which are being specified in the revised Schedule 3 as such. Yeah, Monish, continue.
This clause requires disclosure when a company has used either borrowed funds or securities premium or other sources to give advances or loans or do an investment to a person or an entity or a third party with the understanding that the intermediary will directly or indirectly invest this money into another entity. Simplify things, suppose there's a company A which gives money to company B with an understanding that company B will further invest this money into company C. So Schedule 3 requires a disclosure to be given in the financial statements if there is any arrangement which requires a company to pass through the funds to a different entity, and these funds are either borrowed funds or security premium fund. So the clear intent of the regulator is that they don't want the borrowed funds or the money of the investors to be transferred to a different set of entities. And if these monies are actually being transferred, there should be a proper disclosure in the financial statements. We can move to the next slide. Coming to, what are the disclosures? Date and amount of funds advanced or loans or investments made needs to be given in the financial statements. Date and amount of funds advanced where these entities have given this money to the ultimate beneficiaries, which was entity C in our example, that also needs to be disclosed in the financial statements. One important and very critical aspect is that companies have to give a declaration in their financial statements that they have complied with the requirements of FEMA, Companies Act, and Prevention of Money Laundering Act. Now, this is a very unprecedented disclosure where management is required to give a declaration in the financials that they have complied with specific laws and regulations. And it also casts an obligation on the auditors to do a deep dive into these regulations and ensure 100% compliances, because they are the ones who are actually signing these financial statements. So they will also need to ensure that there's a compliance with these regulations. There's 100% compliance. Key things which a company needs to ensure is compliance with Section 186. And again, there's a reporting requirement under CARO. So company needs to be mindful of the questions which may come up from the auditors at the end of the year. We'll move to the next slide. Now, this particular amendment covers the recipient, the entities which receives the fund. So in our previous example, we have seen there's an entity A, B, and C. A was the entity who was giving funds to entity B as a pass-through entity for doing investment in entity C. So this particular amendment covers entity B, who is actually receiving money on behalf of another entity. So again, reporting requirements are pretty same, that if in case a company receives funds with an understanding to be invested into a separate entity, the disclosure requirements are dates to be given, and amount of funds received during the year, and details of the parties from whom we have received the money and whom will be spending this money, will be giving this money, that needs to be disclosed in the financial statements. We can move to the next slide. Again, in this clause, there's a similar requirement where company needs to give a declaration in the form of compliance of FEMA, Money Laundering Act, and Companies Act. If you see, the regulator has very smartly captured both the legs of the transactions. The companies giving loan will give full disclosures, and the company receiving the funds will also give full disclosure and a declaration by the management that they have complied with the laws and regulations of the company. Move to the next slide. Okay, with this, we move to our last segment, which states changes in the profit and loss account. Yeah, we can move to the next slide. Amendments on the face of the profit and loss account. In the statement of profit and loss account, the total revenue has been replaced with total income. For Section 8 companies, the revenue from operation will now include total grant received during the year. Other changes that are applicable to profit and loss account are undisclosed income, CSR, and cryptocurrency. We'll do a deep dive into these three aspects in our subsequent slides.
Monish, just a time check. Maybe you will have to look at closing it a little fast.
So I think we are almost done. So we are on the last segment. The companies are required to give details of any transaction not recorded in the books of accounts that has been surrendered or disclosed as an income during the assessment, any tax assessment under the Income Tax Act. So if a company under a search or survey or any assessment disclose that they have some unaccounted income which was not forming part of the financial statements in prior years, it needs to be disclosed in the financial statements. This amendment has very far-reaching implications. One is that for companies which are under IGAAP, they need to ensure that as per AS5, a proper disclosure is given for prior period items. And for Ind AS compliant companies, as per the requirement of Ind AS 8, they need to restate their financial statements. Not to mention that your auditors will always question this unaccounted income, and they'll like to see the ICFR implications, that why a significant chunk of income has not been captured in the books of accounts. Is there a fraud angle, and what is the overall corporate governance of the company if these such kind of incomes are getting disclosed in the tax assessments? And move to the next slide. Last amendment is on the corporate social responsibility. CSR was historically carried out with a comply or explain approach, where corporates who had shortfall in meeting the CSR liabilities were not penalized if they do the disclosure in their director's report. The Companies Act 2020 has amended this, whereby a particular time frame is defined for companies to deposit this unutilized money into the specified bank accounts. You can move to the next slide. Management need to ensure that whether they have complied with the requirements of Section 135(5) and 135(6) and give specific disclosures in terms of how much money was required to be spent, whether they have spent this money or not, and what are the reasons behind not spending these monies. The next slide. Last clause is the details of cryptocurrencies and virtual currencies. In case a company has invested or traded into cryptocurrencies or virtual currencies during the financial year, the company need to disclose the profit and loss on the transaction involving cryptocurrencies, amount of currencies held on the reporting date. You've all seen that, IFRS Interpretation Committee had their meeting in which they have decided they've given the outline of what would be the accounting for these cryptocurrencies. They have stated that, if these cryptocurrencies are held for sale in ordinary course of business, then requirement of IAS 2, which is inventories, will be applicable for recognition, measurement, and disclosure. And where, IAS 2 is not applicable, then IAS 38, which is intangible assets, will be applicable for the accounting of cryptocurrencies. With this, we have concluded our presentation on the amendment to Schedule 3. And we open the house for the question and answers.
So just maybe adding as a concluding remark that changes definitely are many here, but more than the changes, I believe the implications could be very far-reaching on most of the clause which Monish really took up. So it's best that organizations, corporates actually start engaging with the auditors and start looking at what will it take to present the financials in March 22, and start working on aspects from now onwards itself, because it's pretty detailed, pretty extensive, and just dealing with it right in the end would be probably a make or break, frankly. So that's all I wanted to add to what Manish presented. Yeah. Sachin, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Nimish, for the excellent presentation. I think we have many queries. Some of them I think we can skip because they have already been taken as a part of the PPT. So if you permit me, I'll just pick up the ones which I feel are relevant, because in any case, we have shot over our scheduled time, right?
Sachin, what we could also do is, just in case if there are questions which remain unanswered, we could provide.
Just do the questions at least before we close. We are way over time, but some of the questions, pointed questions, maybe we can at least tackle those.
Yes,
Sure.
yes, sir. That is exactly what I was trying to suggest.
Yeah.
So if something remains unanswered, we'll give the responses which can be shared with the participants later. So, over to you, Sachin.
Yes, I think one of the key changes which would impact is this implication of the undisclosed income. Okay, so if you could dwell upon that in slightly more detail, and exactly how this disclosure will be made and what will be the implication. I think that's one key question which would be of interest to all participants.
Sure. Monish, you want to take it up?
I'll take up. So the disclosure requirement is the amounts needs to be disclosed, that what are the amounts which have been offered by the company to the auditor as undisclosed income, and a proper note would be required as to why these amounts were not accounted in the previous years. As on the disclosure requirements.
But see, the point here could be that the AO might have in his order alleged that there is an undisclosed income which the company is challenging at multiple levels. Then how would this disclosure be made? I think that is what the question borders around. Yeah.
Okay. So in case something has been added by AO, which is contested by the company, will not be required to be disclosed under this clause. The disclosure requirement is only restricted to those items which are voluntarily disclosed by the company in any assessment or search or survey.
So let me put it that way, is that, if it is concluded fact that this item was not, was skipped in putting it up in the financials, and is something which is eventually added and tax is required to be paid, and it is accepted by the assessee as well, that fine, I missed this out as such. We are talking of those undisclosed incomes only.
Got it. Fair. Okay. The second last question, I think this is relevant again for the audience at large. What will happen if there is a difference between the returns submitted to the banks and books of accounts?
So the companies are required to give a reconciliation in their financial statements as to what are the differences of what was given to the banks and what is being.
So Monish, are these differences quantitative or even in terms of value?
So it will cover both the aspects. Suppose a company has given a wrong aging schedule to a bank and it is actually not matching. A debtor's aging schedule is wrong. So that also needs to be justified in the form of a reconciliation.
Okay. And I think I'll now pick up the last question for the day. So this is regarding the title deeds. So the question is that where title deeds are not in the name of the company, what would constitute as title deeds? So I think obviously what would constitute as title deeds, we can't answer. But then what do you think in that situation would be an appropriate kind of a disclosure? And how would the company deal with this kind of a situation?
So where these title deeds, typically, this will be like the copy of registry or any other document which can substantiate the legal ownership of the company or the person who's actually holding it. It could be a power of attorney or a registry or whatever is there. So that needs to be presented to the auditors by the management.
Okay. So I think with this, we need to close the session because we have very short over our scheduled time. And as Nimish had mentioned, any unanswered questions, those can be forwarded to you by the Secretariat and those could be responded.
Absolutely, Sachin. We'll be responding to all the unanswered questions.
Yeah, sure. I think that would be absolutely in order. Coming to the pleasant task of proposing a very, very hearty, well-deserved vote of thanks. So first, my thanks goes out to Raman sir for setting the context. I think he set the tone from where Nimish actually picked up. To both Nimish and Monish for taking the participants through these changes in a very, very lucid manner. I think time permitting, this could have been much more comprehensive, but I think still you guys did a great job. Thank you so much. To our sponsors for standing by with us, to the Secretariat for their excellent support. Last but not the least, to my chair, Mr. Chawla, who's always there as a big pillar of strength and support, and for moderating this session. And lastly, to the participants for logging in and staying throughout the course of this webinar. We hope that you found it useful. Thank you so much.
Munish, just one last thing. A lot of requests that I see in the chat for your presentation. If you're okay to share it, please send it to the Secretariat. If you're not okay to share it, that's fine. Because
We'll share the presentation now, since it's already presented. We'll share it with you guys. It can be forwarded to the participants.
Yeah, great.
Thank you, Nimesh. Thank you, Munish.
Thank you.
Fascinating
Thank
session.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us here.
Thank you. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Asim. Thank you, Sachin.
Thank you, sir. Bye-bye.
Thank you.